They had black people sticking it to the man. All those black exploitation movies was about black people paying white people back, beating them up, doing karate on them. And it had a lot of black men having sex with white women in movies for the first time. You hadn't seen that before. You had black people selling drugs and getting away with selling drugs. Superfly and Black Caesar, all of these movies. So that pacified black people. And those early 70s movies, not only did they pacify black society, that brought Hollywood back to prominence. That made Hollywood stay afloat, especially Universal and MGM. That gave them the funding they needed to then make the movies like Jaws and Star Wars in 1975. So those movies also pacified us. We were just very happy to see our symbolic heroes on the screen. We weren't thinking about actually getting tangible, real-life resources like we should have. So we got to stop with the symbolic progress thing. And that brings us to the next rule. The next rule is stop falling for the special Negro trick. Because what they do with black people, they will bring one or two black people into some type of structure in white society, and they will do what I call orphanizing. They will treat you like the special orphan. They will shower you with gifts, shower you with praise, give you nice little positions, and then you start thinking you special. You're like, well, hey, I pulled myself up by my bootstraps. How come y'all Negroes can't do it? Ain't that right, massa? All you doing is tap dancing to get your position. There's always been jobs for black folks tap dancing. We've always been orphans in a system of slavery, and white supremacy is slavery. When we talk about slavery, many of us think of antebellum slavery on the plantation. But being in a system of oppression is slavery. And on the plantation, when everybody was working in the field, Massa would always get his little prize orphan and bring him in the house and shower him with gifts. They've always done that. They do it now. That's why celebrities, you see celebrities go over to Africa, they're parading their little African baby around, their little orphan. Hey, I'm not racist. I got a nice little orphan that I take care of. The movie The Blind Side was about that. The Big Mike character, he was just a big orphan they were taking care of. And that's something in white supremacist culture, to get an African and orphanize the African and parade their orphan around. They even do that with animals over there. In the 1800s, there was a big media phenomenon over an African elephant named Jumbo. This was in the 1880s. And the Jumbo elephant was a big phenomenon because Europeans in circuses, even in circuses today, most of the elephants they have are Asian elephants. That's why the ones you see at the circus, those are little small elephants. African elephants are huge. They're real, real big, and technically it's very difficult to tame them. You really can't tame an African elephant. It's very rare that you can tame an African elephant. And like I said earlier, the Europeans, they don't forget. If they take a loss, they assess that loss, and it'll take them 1,000 years to assess that loss if they need to. The first time African elephants were brought into Europe was with Hannibal. Hannibal was an African man who lived in North Africa. He took a fleet of elephants that he tamed from Africa up into the Alps and conquered certain parts of Europe. If you saw Hidden Colors 1, we actually show old coins of Hannibal as an African man, and the other side of the coin has an elephant on it. Now, people in the dominant society, they know this. So they've always been trying to figure out how to tame those elephants that defeated them 1,000 years ago. And Jumbo being taken into Europe, that was the first time the Europeans had ever taken an African elephant into Europe. And the only reason they took Jumbo to Europe is because when they went to Africa, they killed Jumbo's mother when he was a child and then took the baby elephant up to Europe. So they orphanized him. They made him an orphan. And then they paraded their African orphan around like, we finally did it. We finally conquered that African. And Jumbo, they made a Walt Disney movie about him, which was called Dumbo. So even today, when you see the Dumbo cartoon, that's what that's really about. That's why that elephant was such a phenomenon, and that's why them conquering us is such a big deal. and them keeping their foot on our necks, that's such a big deal. Like, look, we're conquering these people. We're conquering the Moors. See, and that brings us to the next code, family, another thing that we really have to stop doing. We're going to have to get off the colorism thing in black society. Because when I look at Instagram and Twitter, I see a lot of that team light skin, team dark skin stuff. And that's silly as hell because we're basically two people on a plantation fighting each other, and we're both on a plantation. See, a lot of dark folks have a misconception that the light-skinned black folks on the plantation got it better, so you'll direct a lot of vitriol towards them. Now, during slavery, there was a little cadence to that because whenever there were slave rebellions, sometimes a lot of the house slaves would tell, but a lot of the field slaves would tell too. See, we have to understand the dynamic of the house slave and the field slave. See, the house slave has always gotten a bad rap. But the field slave is somebody you got to look out for too, because if you look at documents from slavery, and I noticed this not too long ago, doing research for Hidden Colors, I would look at the runaway slave ads in newspapers in the 1800s. And one thing I noticed is that most of the runaway slaves were house slaves. So a lot of people would wonder, why were so many house slaves running away? They were running away way more than the field slaves. And the reason why a lot of the mulatto house slaves were running away is because on a plantation, if you're in a house, you're the house slave, that's as high as you're going to go in the plantation system. You can only go down. You can only go back into the field, which was worse. Now, the house slave, they didn't have it better. You had to get beat up by the missus. You had to get raped on a nightly basis. If you then you still got beat. So being in that house was not a picnic. So a lot of black people who were slaves in that house, they said, okay, I only got two options. Go back in the field, which is worse than what I'm doing now, or I just might as well go for it. So a lot of them just ran away to go for it. Hell, I'd rather die or get my freedom. Now look at the mindset of a field slave. Now, a field slave who's been out there working in the sun all his life, he's looking at that house as a come up. I got to get in that house. See, he can go up in the slave system before he thinks about running away. So a lot of the field slaves were campaigning to get up in that house. Fast forward today, some of the biggest coons that you see on TV are dark-skinned. Look at Larry Elder. Look at Herman Cain. Look at Clarence Thomas. Look at Jesse Lee Peterson. Now you guys can go on YouTube. I did a debate with Jesse Lee Peterson. Jesse Lee Peterson looks, acts, and talks just like a slave from 1840. And y'all, who's heard him before? Am I exaggerating? Go look at 12 Years a Slave and then look at him. Ain't no difference. That dude told me to my face, he said, well, if Trayvon Martin's parents raised him right, he wouldn't have been shot. He told me that with a straight face. That's why I don't mind calling him a coon. So don't get on that colorism thing because light-skinned and dark-skinned folks will throw you under the bus when you least expect it.